the 20th most powerful woman in the UK, but I'm still terrified of Christine Graham. There you go. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this evening in the Scottish borders. What a turnout. This is absolutely incredible. I'm travelling up and down the country pretty much all the time at the moment, speaking at meetings like this. And the one consistent thing about all of these meetings is that no matter how big or how small the hall that the meeting is held in, it is absolutely stowed out. And I think that says something wonderful about the debate we're having in Scotland. Now, I can see from some of the badges and t-shirts on display here this evening that there are a few committee yes voters in the audience. But I suspect there will be some people who are, as things stand just now, planning to vote no. And I guess there will be a fair number of undecided people as well. But the fact that you've all come out here tonight to listen to this debate says that we have an appetite for this debate and a level of engagement in this debate that I have never experienced in my political life previously. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. It's great for our democracy, it's great for our country. Don't let anybody tell you this debate is divisive. This debate is fantastic for Scotland and for Scottish democracy. I'm also very pleased to be sharing a platform this evening with my dear colleague Christine. But Christine, you'll forgive me if I say I'm particularly pleased to be sharing a platform with Andy Miles. I've known Andy for several years now. I probably won't tell you how many years I've known Andy. But Andy's presence here tonight, and I thought his speech was absolutely fantastic. His presence here tonight, together with the presence of Labour for Independence, the Scottish Green Party, I think I see some t-shirts from the Scottish Socialist Party down there, demonstrate that this debate is not about the SNP. This is about the future of Scotland and the democracy of Scotland. When Scotland becomes an independent country, you can vote for whatever party you want to vote for. What you won't have to put up with when Scotland becomes an independent country is any longer having to put up with Westminster governments that have comprehensively lost the election in Scotland. That is an indictment of democracy. Independence is about ensuring we get the governments we vote for at all times, and that is the democratic case for yes. So it's great to have such a diversity in this campaign. What I want to do this evening is make the case for yes. As Ash said, I've believed in independence all of my adult life. I probably believed in independence when I was still, I didn't believe in independence before I was an adult, but let's settle for all of my adult life. I believe in the case for independence in my heart, and I believe it in my head. But the fact that I believe it is not enough for any of you to believe it. It's not enough for any other individual to go into the polling booth on the 18th of September and vote yes. The responsibility of me and the yes campaign is to persuade other people that voting yes for Scotland to become an independent country is the right thing to do for the future of our country, for those of us lucky enough to be alive in Scotland today, and perhaps more importantly, it's the right thing to do for future generations, for our children and for their children. I want to make the case for independence tonight with reference to some of the questions that I am frequently asked as I go on my travels around the country. Now, I'm asked many questions, and no doubt I'll be asked many questions here this evening, covering a whole range of topics and interests and concerns and fears and anxieties. And I'll do my best later on with my colleagues here to answer all of those questions as frankly, as openly and as honestly as I possibly can. But when I think about the questions that I'm asked most often, they roughly would fall into the following categories. Can we really do this? Is Scotland big enough? Are we strong enough? Are we rich enough to stand on our own 2 feet and be an independent country? And then I'm often asked, Why should we do it? What are the benefits of independence? Some people ask, what happens if we don't become independent? What are the consequences of voting no and continuing to allow governments at Westminster that we might or might not have voted for take decisions on our behalf? And then I'm asked a whole host of questions based on things you will hear day in and day out from the No campaign. Will we be able to keep the pound? Will we get to stay in Europe? Will the sky really fall in, like the No campaign tells us that it will? Will we still get to watch Doctor Who? Will we really have to drive on the right-hand side of the road? Believe it or not, one of them actually said that that would be one of the consequences of independence. So these are the broad questions that in the time I've got tonight I'm going to try and address. And if I don't cover your particular point, then please feel free to ask it of me when we get into the Q&A session. But the first question is, can we really do this? And the emphatic, unequivocal answer to that is yes. Scotland is one of the wealthiest countries on the face of this planet. If we were independent today, we'd be the 14th richest country in the world. Now, there's round about 200 countries in the world, so that gives you the sense that we're pretty high up that league table. The UK would be 18th. Not a bad position to be in, but a few places beneath Scotland. If you look at the countries that are above us in that league table of wealth, something like 7 out of the top 10 wealthiest countries in the world are small, independent countries, very similar to Scotland. So the Norways and the Denmarks and the Swedens of this world. So just remember that. An independent Scotland would be the 14th richest country in the world. You know, if we aren't wealthy enough to be independent, it kind of begs the question, how do the 180 or so countries beneath us in that league table manage quite well to be independent countries? The second point I want you to remember is that we pay our way within the UK. We are not subsidised. If there is one argument that you hear often from those arguing for a no vote that makes my blood boil, it is this argument that somehow Scotland relies on largesse from elsewhere in order to pay for the things that we rely on. That is not true. We pay our way. In fact, in each and every single one of the last 33 years, we've generated more tax per head of population than the rest of the UK has. So in years when oil prices have been high and in years when oil prices have been low, we have still generated more tax per head of population than the rest of the UK. We don't depend on oil to be a prosperous country. Oil is a bonus for Scotland. It's a fantastic bonus. We must be the only country in the world that is led to believe by some that oil is some dreadful burden. You know, oil is a fantastic bonus, but our economy doesn't depend on oil. Norway, one of the richest countries in the world, one of the countries that are in the top 10 of the richest countries in the world, if you look at the proportion of its economy and its tax revenues that are made up by oil revenues, it's more dependent on oil than Scotland is. And nobody would argue that Norway can't be an independent country. It manifestly is a successful independent country. So we're not dependent on oil. If you take oil and gas revenues out of consideration completely, our economy, again per head of population, because we are a smaller country than the rest of the UK, but per head of population our economy is roughly the same size as the UK's. If you add oil and gas back in, as you should do, because it is a massive bonus, our economy is something like 20% bigger. Standard & Poor's, the credit rating agency, recently published a report, and it said, and I'm pretty much quoting exactly here, if you take oil and gas revenues out of consideration completely, an independent Scotland would still qualify for its highest economic assessment. We've got a strong and diverse economy, as well as massive oil and gas reserves. We're one of Europe's biggest producers of renewable, potential producers of renewable energy. We've got a thriving food and drink industry. We're world leading in life sciences. We've got so much going for us. So do not let anybody, anywhere, tell you that Scotland cannot be a thriving independent country, because all of the facts and all of the evidence says otherwise. And the next time you hear somebody in the no side saying an independent Scotland, for example, couldn't afford to pay pensions, just remember this: we pay for our pensions already. Where do you think the money to pay pensions to people in Scotland comes from? It doesn't come from some money fairy in Westminster. It comes from your pockets and my pocket, from our taxes and our national insurance contributions. We pay for these things already. It's just that right now we send the money to Westminster and they decide how much of it we should get back. So that's my first argument. We can be independent. And whatever your decision on the 18th of September, do not, please do not, allow anybody to persuade you to vote no on the basis that somehow we can't afford to be independent. We absolutely can. Second question I get asked often though is, why should we be independent? It's like anything else in life. My mother always used to tell me when I was growing up that just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should do it. I won't tell you what kind of things she was talking about, I'll leave that to your imagination. But people understandably say, okay, you've convinced me we can do it, convinced me we should do it. What are the benefits of being independent? Well, I start from the premise that the best people to take decisions about the future of our country, or how we spend the vast resources we've got as a country, the best decisions about how we grow further those vast resources we've got as a country, the best people to take those decisions are us. The people who live and work in Scotland, the people who have got the biggest say in making our country a success. We've already demonstrated that principle through the Scottish Parliament, and Andy already went into some of the examples. It's only because we are effectively independent already when it comes to the running of our National Health Service that our National Health Service has not been broken up and privatised the way the NHS is, disgracefully in my view, in England. Effectively independent when it comes to the running of our education system, that we don't have the situation where students have to pay tuition fees to access what should be a right, the right to education. So if we can run the health service and run the education system, why on earth should we not also run our welfare system, run our economy, to take decisions there that are also in our best interest? Let me just give you 4 examples of what we could do if we were independent that we cannot do just now because we don't have the powers to do it. And these are 4 examples out of a potential 100 examples that I could give you. If we were independent, we'd have full control over tax. We could use tax powers to encourage business growth, to encourage job creation, to create more opportunities for our young people to access here in Scotland. Right now, through the Scottish Parliament, we control 7% of our tax base. That will go up to 15% when the Scotland Act of 2012 comes into force. The vast bulk of control over what taxes we levy in Scotland, how we decide to levy them, to encourage economic growth, those decisions lie elsewhere. Secondly, if we were independent, we could make sure that the minimum wage rises every year, at least in line with inflation, not fall behind inflation as it has done over the past 5 years or so, leaving the lowest paid in our society hundreds of pounds worse off than they should be. If we were independent, we could design and devise and implement a social security system that helped people into work and provided a safety net for people when they're at their most vulnerable, and didn't have to stand by and watch while the welfare changes and cuts being imposed by the Tories are driving more and more people into poverty. And lastly, if we were independent, we could choose not to spend our share of £100 billion, £100 billion, putting new Trident nuclear weapons on the River Clyde. Of what we can do as an independent country that we can't do without the powers that independence gives us. So the next question I get asked is, what happens if we don't vote yes? Well, if we don't vote yes, then in a nutshell, all of these decisions stay in the hands of Westminster. Now, I'm not standing here arguing that governments at Westminster get out of their bed in the morning with the express intention of doing Scotland down. It only feels like that occasionally. But we make up a tiny percentage of all of the seats in the House of Commons. So even without any intention to do Scotland down, our interests are never going to be at the top of the list of priorities for any Westminster government. The only way to ensure that our interests are at the top of our list of priorities all of the time is to make sure those decisions lie in our own hands. And that is the big, big advantage of being independent. Now, before I finish, I just want to address some of the fears and smears that you hear right now on a daily basis, because that's what they are. We can't keep the pound, we won't get into Europe, or whatever else you might want to choose from the playbook of Project Fear, as they describe themselves. When a campaign calls itself Project Fear, it should tell you something about what they are really about. What I would ask you to remember is this: it is in the interests of the No campaign to make you scared and to make you uncertain, and to have the uppermost feeling in your mind as you go into the polling station on the 18th of September to be one of anxiety, so that you just decide to stick with what we've got. So every time you hear a fear or a smear or a scare story, just remember that. It's in their interest to make you scared. Let me take the pound just as an example. We put forward a proposition on sharing the pound. Scotland's pound, as much as it is the pound of the rest of the UK, remember. Not just because that is in the interest of Scotland, it is in the interest of Scotland in our view, that's why we argue it, but also because it would be in the interest of the rest of the UK as well. There are very good, solid, sound, rational reasons why no Westminster government would turn its back on a shared currency. It would incur huge transaction costs for businesses in England. It would deprive the UK's balance of payments of the value of Scottish exports, putting the trade deficit of the UK through the roof with implications for the value of sterling. These are just two reasons. The propositions we put forward, whether it's on the pound or in Europe, are common sense propositions. And the No campaign will argue against them while they're trying to make you scared and uncertain in the heat of this campaign. But if Scotland votes yes, it's that common sense attitude and approach that will prevail. And I would ask you to apply that rational thought. I'm not expecting you just to believe me over Alistair Darling or George Osborne, who I would hope you would believe me over George Osborne. I'm asking you to apply your own common sense and judge what you think the most likely outcome on these issues are. So that's my case for independence. I believe it, as I said at the outset, in my heart and in my head, and I will campaign for it with everything I've got each and every day until the 18th of September. I want to leave you just with this thought. We have, on the 18th of September, such a fantastic opportunity. We are really, really, really lucky. There's not many countries have had the opportunity that we have right now to democratically, peacefully choose the future of our country. On the 18th of September, each and every one of us, as individuals, will hold the future of our country in our hands. We'll all have one vote. Person in the street, to the politician, to the business person, we'll all have one vote. We will be truly sovereign and we will hold the future of our country in our hands. We might not get that opportunity ever again in our lifetimes. Shortly after the polls close, at 10 o'clock on the 18th of September, we will know whether we've kept control of our own country or handed it straight back to Westminster. I know what I hope we do with every fibre of my being. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations to keep control of our country so that we can build the more prosperous, fairer, better country for all of us to live in and for future generations to inherit. Thank you very much.